You're like 60% of the way to actually doing something about them. And so you've got to negotiate with yourself and think, okay, well, if I'm going to fix myself up, what, in my current wretched state, what small steps am I actually willing to take? And that really works. It really works. And, well, that's what behavioral psychologists know. It's like, break the damn problem down until you're willing to take a step forward on that pathway. If something is completely intractable that's facing you, you know, decompose it until just keep cutting it into smaller and smaller pieces until you finally get a piece you think, hey, I can master that. But that's also still worthwhile. You know, it can't be so trivial that you don't get any satisfaction out of it. So, okay, so that's rule 4. That's rule 4. And it's an optimistic rule, right? Because basically it says, despite your wretched present condition and your relative lack of prowess at most things, you can make your life simple enough, if you think about it, so that you'll probably be able to make it slightly better. And then you can iterate that. It's like, that's believable, right? It's not like you're jumping up and down in some sort of narcissistic way about how great you are. It's not that at all. It's like you're taking your limitations and the human limitations, right? Because everyone's like that, into account, and you're actually starting to be willing to realistically work with them. And it really does work, and it accelerates, so that's a good thing. Okay, so rule 5. This is one I thought would be very contentious. But it hasn't been that contentious, which actually surprises me. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Now, I like this rule a lot, because there's a bunch of vicious twists in it. You know, and one of them is, there's propositions nested inside it. One of them is, children can be dislikable. Okay, well, everyone knows that. I mean, when you were a child, there were lots of children you didn't like, right? And even when you're an adult, you have friends, and they have children, and you don't like some of those children. It's true. You know, and you're less likely to invite those adults to your house. You won't say anything, and you smile with your mouth, but not your eyes, when the children, right? That's the same smile a psychopath uses, by the way. And children, it's like, can you imagine what it's like to be a child that no one likes, and then when they go and they see adults, the adults smile at them with their mouth but not their eyes? It's like, what sort of world is that for a child? It's like they're surrounded by well-meaning psychopaths who hate them, right? And that's actually what you do to your child if you allow them to do things that make people dislike them. And so that is not a good thing to do to your child. And so we admit, first of all, that children can be dislikable. And then we admit that parents can facilitate the dislikability of their children. And we admit, third, that parents can dislike their children. You think, oh, parents don't dislike their children. It's like, well, first of all, there's at least 20% of the people in this audience, at least, have not had a very good relationship with their parents. And so, and you know, families can be an absolute snake pit. You're way more likely to be killed by a family member than a stranger. Like, way more likely, especially if you drink with them. So if you don't want to be killed, then don't drink with your family. That, really, I tell you, your risk of homicide just plummets if you're sober and you stay away from your kinfolks. Yeah, so, okay, so, now, the next contentious proposition is that perhaps you should dislike your children. You think, oh no, that can't be possibly. Cute kids can't dislike. You can. You should. Here's when you should dislike your children. You should dislike your children when they're doing things that other people would dislike them for doing. Because if you like them when they're doing, because if you approve of them when they're doing those things, then they won't learn not to do them. And then wherever they go, other kids won't like them and won't play with them and won't facilitate their development forward, because by the time your child's about 4, you've handed over most of the responsibility for socialization to other children. So your job as a parent is to make your child likable by other children by the time they're 4. And I can tell you this too, if you fail at that, they will never recover, no matter what you do. And the experimental and clinical literature on this is painfully clear. So kids who are alienated and antisocial, by the time they're 4, no one knows what to do about it. None of the interventions that have been tried work. None of them. And believe me, psychologists the social scientists have been hitting this problem hard since about 1925. And they've done everything you can possibly think of, and in combination, and a bunch of things you can't think of, and it hasn't worked. And so there's a critical period of development between about the age of 2 and about the age of 4, where you can facilitate the social acceptability of your children, and if you miss that window, well then good luck to them. So, and what seems to happen, here's why it happens, is that, so let's say you have 2 4-year-olds and they're sizing each other up, eh? And because they're trying to figure out what developmental level they're at. And you know, you do that with adults, is you want to be with an adult who's kind of at the same level you are to some degree. If they're way the hell above you in some sphere, then you're not going to relate to them in that sphere. And if they're way below you, it's the same thing. You want someone that you can kind of contend with. And so kids size each other up. If your 4-year-old is still acting like a 2-year-old, then the other 4-year-olds will not play with him or her. And then they won't mature into 5-year-olds. And then they won't mature into 6-year-olds, and then they won't mature into 7-year-olds. They'll just stay 2. And 2, they call them the terrible 2s for a reason. 2-year-olds are relatively egocentric. And so, and if the 2-year-old, if you have a child who's still 2 at 4, then that's that. Because the other kids won't scaffold their development. So it's your job to dislike your children when they're doing dislikable things. It's your moral obligation. And to correct them so that, and the reason you do that isn't to correct them. It's not to exercise your authority. It's not even to instill a sense of morality in them in some arbitrary and technical way. It's simple why you do that. Here's what you want for your children. You want them to have other children line up to play with them. That's like success, man. And so that child is like, they've got the kind of social graces that allow them to go into an arena of children they don't know and make friends quickly. It's like victory, man. You've done like 90% of what you have to do as a parent if you've managed that. And so, and then, but there's more to it too. Like, one of the things I learned when I had little kids, I lived in a rough area in Montreal. We had my daughter, Michaela. We used to roll her around in this little cheap stroller in this working class neighborhood in Montreal. There's lots of rough guys, rough people in that neighborhood. But it was such fun to wheel her around because you'd see these like rough-looking guys, lumberjack-looking guys, you know, working class French-Canadian types, kind of tough and making like Tom Waits gestures walking down the street. And they'd see our little girl in their stroller and like they'd instantly get a goofy grin and like tickle her, you know, and it's like, it's so cool because what you see is that you have to be a pretty damn demented human being not to drop your shell and open up a little bit when you see a young child who's kind of open to the world and fresh, right? And so you see the best of people when you have little kids, if you're fortunate. And so, see, that's what you want for your kids, right? Is you want them to behave in a way that brings out the best in adults. And so when you take them out in the actual world, the adults are happy. And they will be given a chance, you know, because people generally respond quite positively to children unless the children gnaw at their ankles or do something, you know, equally reprehensible. And like a little growling dog that only gets kicked because all it does is growl, you know, that's not a good strategy. And so you want your kids to be eminently desirable to other children. And that solves a massive raft of problems right there. And then you want them to be attractive to adults so that the best side of the adults come forward and welcomes the child continually into the world. And you can actually rely on whether or not you dislike your child. Because, look, we know that you have arbitrary faults, and sometimes your kids are going to irritate you because you're not everything you should be, right? And they're getting on your nerves, and it's your bloody problem, not theirs. But we'll assume that you're 60 to 70% put together, something like that. Or maybe it's higher, maybe it's a little lower. And maybe we could also assume that you're fortunate enough to have a partner who's also 60 to 70% put together in a slightly different way than you. And so the two of you together, added together, might make a person that in the main is 90% put together. And that person that you made jointly is a reflection of the social world. That's what it should be, because that's what a parent is. A parent is a reflection of the real social world. And so if you're going to do your children a favor, then that joint person that you and your partner is reflects the reality of the social world to the child, so the child figures out how to live in the social world. You're not their friend. You know, maybe when you're adults you can be friends. Hopefully you can be friends. But And it's not like you're less than a friend, it's you're way more than a friend, right? Way more. And the child needs that reflection of the social world tempered with a bit of mercy, right? Because if you're a parent, you're going to be more forgiving of your child than the arbitrary social world will be. And that doesn't mean you forgive them everything. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you have more patience. You're bringing them along. That's your goal. That's rule 5. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Well, and then the other thing you can think about is just imagine if you were able to manage that. So, your child does things and you think, oh, I'm not very happy about that. You think, okay, well, maybe I can fix that. I can help this child figure out how not to do those things. You can have them, my son, who was an ordinary little cuss, I used to just put him on the steps when he got too pushy and mouthy. It's like, okay, kid, on the steps with you, which he didn't like at all. He was quite perturbed about that necessity. But, I would put him on the steps and have a little chat with him. This was when he was about 3, and I'd say, look, you can't act like that. And you can sit here and think about it. And when you're ready to be a civilized human being, you can come and tell me, and then we'll have a good day. And so you can sit here and fix things up and have a good day, or you can keep doing what you're doing and have a wretched day. It's like, make a choice, kid. So he'd sit on the stairs like, mad. And I'd come up to him, 2 minutes later and say, look, are you ready to get up off the stairs yet? He'd go, no, I'm not ready yet. And he was trying with all his might to control his rage because he's a little kid. And little kids, they have temper tantrums. They're completely consumed by rage. It's not easy to bring that under control. And so he was sitting there like fighting with his hypothalamus, this ancient circuit, trying to bring it under control. And then, I'd leave him be, and usually after about 5 minutes or so, he'd come and he was more contrite. And, the attitude that he would bring to bear then was something I liked right away. It was like he was ready to be a civilized human being again. And then I'd instantly like him, and because the rule was, once you get off the stairs and you've decided to be a civilized human being, then I like you again, right away. It's like I'm not going to hold a grudge. That's one of the useful things about using effective disciplinary strategies. You don't have to hold a grudge. It's like, it's done with. Because it's actually done with. So he'd come and say, well, I want to have a good day. And then we'd have a good day. And the consequence of that was that we mostly had good days. And so what a deal. There's a relationship that you have, it's probably the only relationship you ever have in your whole life, where it can actually be almost all good if you're careful. And the only consequence of that is that it generalizes for other people. So not only does it work for you, and hopefully for your partner, but it also works for your child and other people. So it's like, what the hell, that's a pretty good deal. And all you have to do is have the fortitude to let your child know in the gentlest possible but effective manner, right? Because you never use more discipline than necessary, it's just counterproductive. How to conduct themselves in the world so that everyone is happy that they're around. And there's zero downside to that. So except that you have to adopt the responsibility of actually taking a stance in relationship to your child's behavior. And people are terrified of their children now, especially, and often won't do that. They're not willing to risk the error that they might make in the discipline. And it's not helpful. So, okay, rule 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. That's the darkest chapter in the whole book. I actually find it rather engaging to tackle dark subjects because I found that there's something believable about darkness. Like if someone is telling you a bunch of good things, you think, well, what the hell are they up to? Which is reasonable to ask that question. But if they tell you a bunch of really dark things, then, well, you already know those dark things exist, so it's believable. And then if they're willing to sort of confront those dark things, you think, oh, well, maybe there's something to this. And so what I did in chapter 6 was I've tried for many decades to put myself in the shoes of people who've done terrible things. I've done that when I've read history, which is a pretty brutal thing to do, but also when I read about criminal behavior, especially the brutal criminal behavior. It's not even criminal, it's the wrong way of thinking about it, because you know, if a criminal robs a bank, you think, well, they want the money. That's sort of human, you can relate to that. But if someone shoots up a high school or shoots up an elementary school, it's like calling that criminal. That just doesn't work out because, well, a criminal wants your car. You want your car too, so you can understand the criminal. It's just, your approach is different. But the motivation is the same. But, you know, to do something like the young man did when he shot up the Sandy Hook Elementary School, that's a whole different issue. The question is, why do people do that? And the reason for that, it's outlined very briefly in Rule 6, but I think succinctly, is that, well, it has to do with the issue of failure again and the tragedy of life. And Rule 6 is also a discussion of the attitude that you need to develop in the face of the tragedy of life. So people are bound by their vulnerability, and they're bound by their mortality, and they're liable to be betrayed and hurt. All of those things are canonical parts of existence. Everyone experiences them. Sometimes it's self-betrayal. It doesn't matter. It's still a reality of malevolence among people is a reality of the world, as is tragedy. And that's true to some degree, even if you conduct yourself properly. You know, and that's the old mystery. Why do good things happen to bad? Why do bad things happen to good people? Which is a deep question. Everyone asks themselves that question when things go wrong in their life, especially when they've been trying hard to set things right. And it can turn you against life. And the people who do these terrible crimes, so to speak, are people who've been turned against life. And in a very deep sense, in the deepest of all possible senses, they're turned against life actually in a religious sense. And I can't take the time to explain precisely why that's the proper level of analysis, but to think about it, to answer the question, why would someone shoot a classroom full of elementary school kids? You have to go way deep down into things. You have to go as deep as you possibly can into the mystery of human motivation and the catastrophe of life. And way down at that level, that's essentially the level that religious language is designed to, what would you say, to communicate. This is independently of your belief in a deity. I'm making a psychological case here. The people who commit these terrible crimes are embittered by life. And they believe that because of their embitterment, and perhaps justifiable embitterment, at least to some degree, because there's plenty of things to be bitter about in life, that it's okay for them to act as the universal judge of being and to take their revenge. And that is precisely what they're doing. And I attempted to justify that, because you cannot understand something until you can justify it. And then to produce a counter-argument. And the counter-argument is, yeah, life is extraordinarily difficult. And people are subject to the tragedy of their lives, anti-betrayal, and malevolence, all of that. And you might ask, well, why not be bitter? And I think the answer to that is related to the things we've already discussed to some degree. What makes you think that you've done everything you possibly could to put things right enough so that you're in a position to judge? And this is actually an optimistic question. And it relates to, as I said, the things we discussed earlier. It's like there's a catastrophe built into each of our lives. The fact that life is suffering. The question is, what's the appropriate attitude in the face of that? And I would say, do absolutely everything you possibly can to set things right before you dare to stand up as the judge of everything that exists. It's a temptation that everyone falls prey to. And I think the optimistic end of that is, things can be a lot better than they are. And your capacity to make things a lot better than they are is far less limited than you might think, regardless of your starting point. You know, and people have been criticizing me because I don't take, hypothetically, the fact of differential socioeconomic advantage into account. It's like, well, I'm not naive. I know that some people are born with advantages that other people aren't. It's complicated because advantages are multidimensional and people generally pay a price for their gifts, let's say. So it's complicated. But it doesn't matter in some sense, because regardless of the conditions of your existence, arbitrary as they are, your best move forward is to try to set things right as much as you possibly can. And it's a courageous attitude. It's your willingness in some sense to take responsibility for the conditions of life, for the tragedy of life, and for the malevolence of life. to take responsibility for that. It's an unbelievably noble task in some sense, because it's really hard to do that. Just because you know that you're bounded by